I remember sitting alone in my car one evening after work, staring at the steering wheel long after I had parked. The engine was off, but I stayed there because I wasn't ready to walk inside and answer the same question again. How was work? My family would ask it with kindness, and I would answer, fine, even though I hadn't felt fine for months. Every morning I woke up before sunrise, fought traffic, spent the day following schedules that someone else had created, and came home too tired to think about the small business I kept telling myself I wanted to build. I had convinced myself that the solution was simple. If I quit my job, I would finally have time. More time would become more focus would become more clients would become more money. The idea seemed so logical that I stopped questioning it. I only imagined the freedom. I never imagined everything that came with it. One afternoon I asked a close friend if he thought I should resign. He didn't answer right away. Instead he asked, if you quit tomorrow, who is paying you next month? I smiled because I thought he was missing the point. I'll have more time to find clients, I said confidently. He nodded but looked unconvinced. Maybe, he replied, or maybe you'll spend that time worrying instead of creating. I remember feeling slightly annoyed. I thought he was being negative. Looking back now, I realize he wasn't trying to discourage me. He was trying to show me something I wasn't ready to see. A few months later, I handed in my resignation. On my last day, everyone congratulated me. They said things like, "You're so brave," and I wish I had the courage to do that. I believed them. I packed my desk, hugged a few coworkers, and drove home feeling lighter than I had in years. The next morning I woke up naturally without an alarm. The apartment was quiet. Sunlight filled the kitchen while I made coffee. I opened my notebook and wrote a list of exciting ideas. It felt like the first day of a completely different life. For several weeks, everything seemed wonderful. I worked when I wanted, took breaks without asking permission, and finally felt in control of my schedule. Friends would message me during the day and ask what I was doing. "Building my business," I proudly replied. Then something slowly changed. The excitement faded, and reality arrived very quietly. Some weeks I had several projects. Other weeks my inbox stayed empty. I refreshed my email far more often than I would ever admit. Every notification made my heart race. Most of the time it was only advertisements or newsletters I had forgotten to unsubscribe from. One month I earned more money than I had ever made before. I celebrated by ordering dinner and calling my parents. I thought I had finally figured everything out. The following month I earned almost nothing. I sat at the same kitchen table, staring at the numbers on my laptop, wondering how 2 months could look so different. That was the first time I understood that inconsistent income creates a different kind of stress than a difficult job. It wasn't loud. It was quiet. It followed me while I cooked dinner, walked through the grocery store, and tried to fall asleep at night. I started questioning every decision I had made. One afternoon I met a former coworker for lunch. He asked how freelance life was going. I forced a smile and said, "It's good. Busy." The truth was that I had been worrying all morning. Halfway through lunch, he looked at me and quietly asked, "Really?" I laughed, because he had seen through me so easily. For the first time, I admitted that I wasn't sure whether I had made the right choice. He listened without interrupting. When I finished talking, he surprised me by saying, "You know what I miss most when I work from home?" I expected him to mention money or stability. Instead, he said, "Having someone nearby to tell me I'm doing okay." I hadn't realized how much I missed that too. At my old job, there were meetings, coworkers, deadlines, and managers. Even when work was difficult, there were constant signals that I was moving in the right direction. Working alone meant every decision belonged to me. Every mistake belonged to me too. There were days when I spent hours wondering whether I should change my prices, redesign my website, or offer a new service. There was nobody to ask. The silence became one of the hardest parts of working independently. Around that time, I attended a small networking event. I expected people to share marketing tricks or business strategies. Instead, I found myself sitting next to someone who had worked independently for many years. We talked after the presentation, and I admitted that I was struggling with unpredictable income. He asked me a question I had never considered. Do you keep your business money separate from your personal money? I shook my head. Everything went into one bank account. He smiled gently and pulled out a notebook. He drew 2 simple circles. This one is your life, he said, pointing to the first circle. This one is your business. Then he connected them with a small arrow, instead of overlapping them. He explained that many new freelancers accidentally treat every payment as personal income. They celebrate during good months and panic during slow months, because they cannot clearly see what belongs to the business and what belongs to themselves. He told me that separating accounts wasn't only about accounting. It changed the way people made decisions. Business expenses became easier to understand. Savings became more intentional. Unexpected quiet months became less frightening because the numbers finally made sense. I had never heard anyone explain it that way before. It sounded almost too simple, yet it completely changed how I looked at my finances. The following week, I reorganized everything. I created separate budgets and stopped treating every payment as money I could immediately spend. It didn't make my income more predictable overnight, but it made uncertainty feel measurable instead of mysterious. That small change gave me something I hadn't realized I was missing: clarity. Not long afterward, another lesson arrived. A potential client contacted me asking about my services. I was afraid they would choose someone else, so I lowered my price before they even negotiated. They accepted immediately. At first I felt relieved, but over the next few weeks they requested more revisions, more meetings, and more changes than we had originally discussed. I found myself working late into the evening for less money than I had earned at my previous job. When the project finally ended, I calculated the hours I had spent and quietly closed my laptop. I understood why experienced freelancers warned against pricing out of fear. The problem wasn't only earning less. Low prices often attracted conversations that focused almost entirely on cost instead of value. That realization stayed with me much longer than the project itself. Gradually, I stopped trying to accept every opportunity. I became more careful about the kind of work I accepted and the people I worked with. Some months were still slow, but I no longer believed every slow week meant failure. I also noticed another change inside myself. At the beginning, I thought my biggest challenge would be learning new professional skills. Instead, I discovered that running an independent business required completely different abilities. I had to explain clearly who I helped, what problem I solved, and why someone should trust me. Years of experience alone weren't enough. I met many talented people who struggled for exactly the same reason. They were experts in their field, yet when someone asked what they actually offered, they hesitated. Watching those conversations taught me something important. People rarely buy expertise by itself. They buy clear solutions to problems they already recognize. I had never understood that distinction before. It changed the way I introduced myself and described my work. Looking back, the hardest part of leaving my job wasn't learning to work harder. It was learning to think differently. At my old job, someone else created the structure. Deadlines appeared on my calendar. Meetings reminded me what mattered. Performance reviews told me whether I was improving. Alone, I had to build those systems myself. Some weeks I succeeded. Other weeks I failed completely. There were mornings when I spent an hour cleaning the apartment instead of facing difficult work, because nobody would notice the difference except me. Over time, I learned that freedom and responsibility arrived together. One without the other had never really existed. 2 years have passed since I left my full-time job. There have been months when I questioned everything, and months when I felt deeply grateful for the path I chose. I've experienced quiet mornings filled with confidence, and sleepless nights filled with doubt. Sometimes I miss having coworkers nearby. Sometimes I don't miss office life at all. The interesting part is that I no longer ask whether leaving was the right decision in general. I asked whether I was becoming the kind of person who could handle the decision I had already made. Those turned out to be two very different questions. When people ask me now whether they should quit their jobs to become independent, I always remember the confidence I had before I resigned. I remember believing that courage alone would carry me through everything. I smile because I recognize that version of myself. I also remember the quiet afternoons, the empty inbox, the fear of unpredictable income, the loneliness of making every decision alone, and the surprising relief that came from something as ordinary as separating one bank account into two. None of those experiences made me regret my choice. They simply made me understand it more honestly. If I could sit beside the person I was on that evening in the parked car before everything changed, I wouldn't tell him to stay or to leave. I would simply tell him that freedom isn't something you discover the day you resign. It's something you slowly build through preparation, patience, uncomfortable mistakes, and small decisions that almost nobody else ever sees.